Good afternoon.
Hello.
How are we doing, guys?
Doing good?
Doing well. How are you?
How's your ECC?
ETC been nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Modular Summit a little bit better?
Hopefully.
definitely bigger.
Yeah, that's right. Cool. We are here to talk about sovereign rollups. So maybe we'll just start with like a lightning round of introductions and what you do, what your projects do. We'll let the conversation evolve from there. I am David. I'm an investor at Anagram.
Sure, I'm Felipe. I'm a co-founder of Cartesi. Our idea is to let builders build more complex and intricate dApps. So to do that, we built a RISC-V execution environment, which allows you like to bridge Web2 tooling. And the idea is to work and let the builders build more complex dApps than the ones we currently see on normal blockchain applications.
That's awesome. Hey everyone, my name is Jim. I'm one of the co-founders of Sovereign Labs, and what we build at Sovereign is we try to build the most flexible and performant rollup framework. So users just bring, similar to Cosmos SDK or Substrate, bring their business logic. This time it's written in Rust, and we take that and we enable it to be deployed as a rollup on any base blockchain. It could be Bitcoin, it could be Celestia, it could be Solana, and yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so I don't want to start a semantics war. However, I think it's really helpful to start with just shared definition of what is a sovereign rollup. Jim, do you want to lead us off?
Sovereign rollup, from our perspective, is just a rollup that doesn't have a validating bridge to the smart contract or the execution layer of the L1, of the blockchain that the rollup inherits its security from.
Yeah, so actually, I'm definitely not a specialist in sovereign rollups, so I'm here to learn from him a lot. But I see sovereign rollups as a pure function over data availability layer. So it's so like you choose the data availability, and then everything else is governed by social consensus, and you don't have an official official place that you settle to.
So our view of it is a bit different. So like the social consensus has been talked a lot about, but from our perspective, at the end of the day, when you're like bridging to any other like rollup, or if in your case your sovereign rollup does have a validating bridge, your rollup does have a validating bridge, there still needs to be the canonical like state transition function that like these bridges will respect. And in that sense, like you can't just use social consensus to update all these other bridges. So there is a defining the bridges basically in this case. In Ethereum-based smart contract rollups, there's a single bridge that defines the rollup. In sovereign rollups case, it's more like Cosmos. The rollup can be connected to many different rollups, and like the L1 and the state transition function that those bridges accept is the right version of the rollup.
So just asking one question. So you don't fork by social consensus. You actually have to have you cannot just hard fork your sovereign rollup because the bridge is connected to a bunch of other rollups, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so we are at a point in crypto, I think, where we've separated out a lot of the primitives for building your own sovereign blockchains or rollups, right? And we've made those tools much easier for application developers, to where we've kind of like compressed the time to build your own sovereign rollup or blockchain from months or years to really weeks at this point. Why do application developers want to choose a sovereign rollup?
Yeah, so at Cartesi, as I said, we're a modular execution layer. Mm-hmm. So our execution environment can be used for, it can be an L2 and L3, you can run as a sovereign rollup. I think sovereign rollups are good use cases for applications that are quite big and independent, and they don't need to interrupt that often, so that's my current view on it. And I believe that's like, say, if you are running World of Warcraft on-chain, then a World of Warcraft can be a sovereign rollup because it doesn't have like shared assets between many different layers. You can fork more easily because the assets are all basically defined in the rollup itself. So that's how I think about sovereign rollups.
Yeah. Again, our thinking is a little bit different here. By the way, like at Sovereign, we don't necessarily see ourselves as purely like Sovereign rollup toolkit. You build a rollup, and like this Sovereign like rollup versus not like regular rollup is a bit of like a semantic and not existing the definition. So as long as you generate a secure rollup, you can run it as a Sovereign rollup, or you can have a validating bridge if you're deployed on Ethereum or if you're deployed on Solana. And at that point, it's not a Sovereign rollup. It's like a regular, like a smart contract rollup. And from our perspective, there's not that big of a difference between the two. So it's hard to say that one is like in which instances is a Sovereign rollup more useful or like not, because like. Do you need a bridge to the L1? If you need does your L1 support execution environment enough to be able to build a bridge? Sure, build that bridge, and in that, like, if you do that, then like your rollup is not going to be considered a Sovereign rollup. In Celestia and Bitcoin, you can't currently build that bridge anyway, so you have to build a Sovereign rollup. But it's hard to say like when it's like much preferable to be a Sovereign rollup versus a rollup deployed on Celestia. If we dig a little bit deeper, it could be like liquidity, because if you're really dependent on being tied to the Ethereum ecosystem or the Solana ecosystem, and like you want to have a trustless bridge to these like L1s, then you likely don't want to have you likely don't want to be the Sovereign rollup. You just want to have that bridge to Ethereum or Solana.
So just to align a little bit, so if you believe, like if there's a rollup that has like 3 canonical bridges, meaning that it has assets on Ethereum, maybe has assets on Solana, and has assets on, I don't know, like Base. Is that a Sovereign rollup to you because it doesn't have a single canonical bridge but has many canonical bridges?
No, from our perspective, a rollup can be a rollup on only a single blockchain. There has to be only a single blockchain that you inherit your security from. I mean, there are very complex ways to like have 2 rollup, like have inherit data from like multiple blockchains, and then you get the security of worst of like both blockchains. But normally, in the simple sense, like a rollup can be a rollup of a single base blockchain, and then it can have regular IBC type bridges to other blockchains. Like it can have Solana is through Picasso connected to IBC. Hey, Connor. It's connected to Ethereum through Axelar. And so as long as it's deployed in one DA layer, then it can connect to others through trust minimized bridges, but it can't have like this validated bridge.
Hey, Connor. Hey. Okay, cool. So, you know, when we're thinking about Sovereign rollups, and you touched on it a little bit, we talked about bridging. Interoperability surely is an important thing for Sovereign rollups, whether that's synchronous or asynchronous, and we can get into that. But how are you thinking about and pitching to the application developers this interoperability?
How are we thinking about interoperability? Yeah, so at Sovereign Labs, as we were building Sovereign SDK, like initial liquidity was like a major problem for a lot of our users. So we, for our Celestia deployments, we started to work on an IBC integration, similar to the like regular IBC bridges. Sovereign SDK rollups that are deployed on Celestia will have IBC connections. Hopefully, in time, we think we can have IBC connections to Sovereign SDK rollups on Bitcoin. And the way it works is that in a regular IBC bridge, you validate the signatures of like the base blockchain validators. And in a Sovereign SDK rollup, if you're running on Celestia, you run that same verification, which I think Connor has worked a little bit on to do it in ZK. And on top of that, you run a snark verifier that enables you to, or like the optimistic light client to make sure you can get to the state root of the rollup. And once you get to the state root of the rollup, afterwards it's like a kind of like a DevX issue. You can like integrate any type of bridge. You can integrate IBC, you can integrate Hyperlane, any sort of those like higher level like bridging tools.
IBC is a spec. It doesn't force you to trust the validator set. What's nice about it is there's part of the spec is the definition of a light client, and there's 2 implementations that currently exist to implement the IBC light client interface. One is the Tendermint consensus verifier, and the other is called the solo machine. And theoretically, you can develop as many more of them as you want. You said you want to connect Bitcoin rollups with IBC. You could do that. Yep. You can create some sort of Bitcoin verifying thing that conforms to that software specification, and then you can do it. Same with Ethereum or any other chain. You can also upgrade it to somehow verify the state transition function. You could somehow upgrade that to verify ZK proofs of correct execution, or you could even add a delay and do fraud-proof style.
So that's exactly what we're doing. We're using the light client, like the Cosmos light client that like Celestia already has, and on top of that, we're asking for like destination chains that are trying to bridge from a sovereignistic rollup to verify the snark verifier on top of like the Cosmos light client. But I'm very excited about someone building a Bitcoin SPV light client as a Cosmos that adheres to the IBC spec, and in that way we can also bridge from Bitcoin sovereign rollups. That would be very cool.
In your view, a rollup that wants to interoperate to the other sovereign rollups, it has to run the light clients of each of the rollups that it's running in a sense, right? Whether that's like verifying a validity proof or knowing how to play a fraud-proof game of that other rollup. Is that it?
So yes, if you're deployed on the same base blockchain, then you have to run, if you're trying to bridge from a ZK rollup, then you just have to run a single snark verifier, and we have our whole blockchain succinct, like Mina, so there is no much like machinery outside of like this snark verification, and then we can aggregate the proofs of all rollups that live on the same DA layer, all the ZK rollups that live on the same DA layer. So with a single proof, you can get basically a state root view into infinite number of rollups that live on the same DA layer. If you are trying to bridge from like a fraud-proof based, like optimistic rollup on the same DA layer, you have to run their light client. But that's why we kind of expect the hub-and-spoke model to work for optimistic rollups, and for ZK rollups, they'll just be connected as in a mesh connection to all the other rollups.
Awesome. Connor, thanks for joining us. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit more about like what you do at Celestia Labs and what you're working on, because I think there's actually been a few breakthroughs just as of late that have taken place that might be interesting to talk about.
Sure. I am substituting for Manav, who couldn't make it today, and he's a better fit for this panel if this is a panel about sovereign rollups. But I used to work on Rollkit. I spent a year working on Rollkit, which is a sovereign rollup framework. And Rollkit is a sovereign rollup framework which is compatible with the Cosmos stack. So you can use Cosmos SDK or other kinds of ABCI state machines to create sovereign rollups on arbitrary DA layers easily. Were you asking about new breakthroughs on that side or on the Celestia side?
On the Celestia side, that might kind of like bolster what we're talking about here with sovereign rollups. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. So Celestia.
Pretty open-handed question.
Yeah. I'm just thinking if there's anything that has been done on the Celestia side to improve sovereign rollups recently. There's been some stuff to improve non-sovereign rollups recently. The snark account stuff there may be some utility for the SRUs from snark accounts, but I think people are mainly excited about snark accounts for like settled rollups, the non-sovereign kind of rollup.
Yeah, since we don't really look into the distinction of sovereign or not sovereign and sovereign labs. It's funny, but snark accounts, once implemented, will enable a lot of all the TIA to be trustlessly transferred to the rollups, where they can be used for any purpose because these rollups are Turing complete. So I think that's one very exciting development. On the other hand, there's lots of engineering improvements that happen that obviously don't get talked about because these are implementation details, but we've been working with Celestia Labs and for example We need to verify like Celestia's data structures inside our ZK proofs to be able to build these succinct rollups. And there has been like a couple of engineering improvements that like make our life way easier. So we're very happy about that. I'm talking about the authored signer for the blobs.
The which?
Authored signer, like address of like the paper blob, like the blob's sender address gets included in the blob as like the first part. It's small implementation detail, but on the engineering side, like small implementation details help us a lot to move fast.
Right. Oh, also, this may be something that we should talk about, not on a panel, but I think I spoke with Preston, and I asked him, how do you, because you guys have to go through every blob, and you have to, for the blobs that are not relevant to the SRU that are in the namespace, you have to prove that they're not relevant to the namespace. And I think Preston told me that that was easier to do on Bitcoin than on Celestia, which is a huge problem because we're trying to be the best chain to do exactly that. So we need to talk about whatever makes it easier on Bitcoin, we need to bring to Celestia.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm very excited about Celestia personally because at Cartez we have this concept that we try to put forth called the cone of innovation. So since we are focused on an execution environment and computational scalability, like computational scalability makes less sense if you don't have a very good data layer to support like real data, right? Because it doesn't matter if you have like a very good computer if you can only use very little amounts of data. So we see the design space of applications opening up a lot when you start to work with app chains and good execution environments, and you see like a data layer that can actually support like real amount of data, as in you have on Web 2.
Cool. How do you guys thinking about like governance for sovereign rollups in terms of upgradability? How do users reason about that?
I think there are two models. One of them is if you want to upgrade your application, you deploy a new version of your application, and slowly your users that like want to get onto the new version, move their assets out of the previous version and like move on to the new version. Another path is to encode an automatic a voting-based like upgrade process into the main like state transition function of the rollup, so that all of the bridges can update their view of the rollup binary basically. We've seen like demand from users for both, and I think as people like deploy these rollups more and more in production, people will come with more interesting, more complex, likely like ways to do these upgrades that like fit their business model. But those are like the main two things that I'm seeing for now. And one like cool idea that we had, and like we will only implement if there's like actual feature request for it. But you can imagine a scenario where if there's an issue with like some of like the business logic of the application, a security council could revert the rollup to being only of like transferring assets rather than like all the like the business logic functionality that's inherent to the rollup. And so at that point, people can only use the rollup to exit. So that that's one like crazy idea that we had that we have to analyze more. But those are some ideas.
Yeah, my understanding before coming to this panel was that sovereign rollups would fork through social consensus. So like they would upgrade through hard forks. But if that's not the case, then I think like I agree with you on the options. You can either launch a new version, and that's in a sense an opt-in upgrade because users have to move their assets, or you can have the upgrade baked into the state function, the state transition function, either through a governance model or say a security council or anything else, and then that's in a sense an opt-out method, right? Because you leave the application if you don't want to get upgraded with it. I think that's much better than forking through social consensus, because I think social consensus is actually much more expensive than it looks.
Oh yeah, I think there's a gigantic difference between the rollups that can be easily upgraded with social consensus and the ones that need some sort of vote because you have a trust minimized bridge to the base layer that's immutable or something. Gigantic, stark difference between those two things, which is why I still like to use the distinction between sovereign and settled rollups?
Yeah, in any rollup, anytime that you start having bridges to the base blockchain or to another rollup, the moment you add like validating bridges, you have to have a model of like you can't use social consensus unless all the bridges somehow accept upgrading through like social consensus, which is hard to reason about because presumably the other rollups are also going to be like the other rollups are also going to have some sort of bridges, and they're also going to have to upgrade, and so you like there has to be some like social consensus doesn't go too much with rollups, unfortunately.
The reason everyone says rollups aren't real now is because it's like theoretically possible for a L2 with an immutable validating bridge to the L1 to fork away from that bridge and break it. So, for example, Arbitrum, hard forking in such a way that all the ARB tokens and all the other tokens that were minted on there go to the hard fork, but then the ETH is broken, and so the ETH that was bridged up through the original bridge goes to 0 on the L2. Technically that's possible. No one's ever going to do that. So, like, rollups aren't real in theory. In practice, they're very real.
Interesting. Okay. So, we're all building for a future where we actually have applications on sovereign rollups. I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of adoption of these frameworks and what types of applications are actually being built.
So we have a few users in the we have a few like derivatives exchanges being built on Sovereign SDK because Sovereign SDK can provide very, very low latency soft confirmations, which in the case of derivatives exchanges becomes extremely useful. Thanks to like the fact that we can also build rollups on Bitcoin, we have a category, we have a bunch of users, Strea, Alpen Labs, Bison, building on Sovereign SDK forks on Bitcoin, and derivatives exchanges, Bitcoin rollups, Solana rollups. One of the derivatives exchanges I mentioned about is building on Solana, and a few gaming and other like applications are looking into Solana rollups. Just as an ecosystem-wise, they want to be connected to Solana. And lastly, we're seeing people building SVM rollups using Sovereign SDK and MoveVM rollups. So we're all over the place, to be quite honest, in terms of, because the SDK's main goal is to be one of the most flexible frameworks, and so that leads to like users from a lot of different ecosystems and use cases. But it's nice to see the momentum.
One Rollkit user that I can shill is Astra, the new Stargaze rollup.
So thinking about the difference between sovereign rollups and settled rollups that I know you don't agree with too much, but I think good use cases for sovereign rollups are those that are very big applications that a lot of people use, but they don't have to interop a lot, especially exchange assets with other rollups. So say big games in which like if you have some financial interoperability that can be done by liquidity providers who live in that chain but also live in like whatever other chain you want to exchange your money to. So I do like sovereign rollups for those kinds of applications because, as I said before, say a World of Warcraft on a sovereign rollup doesn't have to pay the price to settle on another chain or to settle on a bunch of different bridges, right? So I like those types of applications for sovereign rollups. For other applications that have more need of interoperability and so on, I think settled rollups are very good. So for instance, we have at Cartesi, there's a very cool application that's being built called Rives, which is an arcade game, a world arcade decentralized. And you not only can play the games, but you can also sell and buy cartridges. So you can program your own game, you can sell that to the protocol, and then that would be available for players to play. I think that's it would be a good use case for sovereign rollups if all the games were there from the beginning, but this cartridge market makes it a better fit for settled rollups, in which you can actually like have a market that interacts with a shared liquidity of whatever your can-and-go bridge is.
Another open-ended question, but in a world where we have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of sovereign rollups, how are you guys thinking about UX and UIs for these different things?
So there are two limiting things in the current state of blockchain technology that's limiting UX across rollups. One of them is that the consensus, like the time it takes these base blockchains to come to consensus, because that's always going to be a limiting factor of how fast these rollups can communicate. And the actually like bigger bottleneck at the moment is ZK proving latency. ZK proving, like, for a rollup to communicate with another rollup like completely trustlessly, you have to first publish your data on the base blockchain. The base blockchain block needs to be produced, and then over that produced block needs to be finalized, and someone needs to come in and like prove that block. So until we see these like latencies come down a lot, sending messages trustlessly between these rollups will take quite a bit of time and will lead to like inefficiencies. But at the same time, we see that with for a lot of users, for users that are not moving tens of millions or like billions, we do see that for the everyday user, the relayer systems or like low security systems like do help a lot, and like they do, like relayers provide like fast messaging, and so users opt into that quite often. So as long as we have the rollups actually running in production and their throughput way higher than where they are now, I think the bridging issue, like which is the main UX issue right now, will be alleviated quite soon.
If you give everyone a standard to follow, like IBC, which is a really complicated spec that has for the first few years of its life, had very messy UX and difficult to read code, it's worth it. It pays for itself over time, because once there's a standard, even if the UX around the standard isn't great at first, it allows someone to come in later with a little bit of software engineering elbow grease and build something that will knock everything into place. You can see this now with the skip API. IBC is not bad anymore. Now you can go to ibc.fun and seamlessly jump around Cosmos chains, and it actually feels very good. It reassures me that creating the IBC standard was worth it, and it will pay off, and UX is just a matter of time and a little bit of elbow grease.
Yeah, I definitely agree that UX is a matter of time. I think about UX in two main verticals. One is dev UX, so the UX of those building the applications that the end users are going to interact with. And I think for those UX, for the devs, there are a few things that help them a lot in their journey to build application. One is predictability of the so standards, good written standards, very well established APIs, also Web 2 tooling in a sense. So making their environments, the environments that they interact with, as close to the ones they're used to as possible, allowing them to have many layers of abstraction and convenience, so they don't have to like rebuild the wheel every time. They can import and reuse code that was built by other people. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there in the developer UX. I think for the end user UX, it's often a trade-off between centralization and UX. So for the paranoid user, I don't think we have to give them that much UX. I think for the say naive user, then I think we have things like chain abstractions. You have things like Infura and so on for Ethereum. And I think what we have to work on is to make sure that those centralized actors who are providing you with UX are as in a sense punishable as possible, so as transparent as possible, as slashable as possible. But I do think it's very hard to provide the UX that we're used to in a, like, say, normal world without making some trade-offs in the centralization spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so Connor mentioned like maybe rollups are not real. Jim, like, what is the most common misconception that you would like to clear up about sovereign rollups?
What's the most general misconception? Before I answer that question, I do want to come back like to the previous question of like user experience, because I think it's super important. I do think, like, I would just wanted to share one excitement from my perspective. I think wallets were like a huge distraction and point of like pain for lots of users. But thanks to like a lot of blockchains adopting, I'm forgetting the team's name, like the social login type systems where like you're able to generate a private key on the browser for the application that you come in. Later, if you want to bridge to another application, you can export your keys and like put them into another app. Preview, for example, like preview-like solutions are really making the blockchain application UX not that much different from a regular Web 2 UX, and I think that's what we should be striving. On top of that, like we've seen that with like rollups, people are very okay with trusting centralized sequencers because in the worst case, if the centralized sequencer is acting bad, you can exit. So now we can give soft confirmations at the levels of Web 2 applications, which is another incredible like user experience improvement, which I don't think we've like seen like the whole implications of. I think lots of Web 2 like developers will come to see this and build applications on blockchain technologies thanks to these improvements. The last thing is just like sending messages. Async calls on internet takes about 300 milliseconds or so. Right now on blockchains, on Cosmos, it takes about 5 seconds. On like rollups, it takes anywhere from 15 minutes for ZK rollups to a day or so for optimistic rollups. And that will come down as ZK gets cheaper and ZK proven latency comes down and block times for base blockchains comes down. But bridging aside, like we're doing really well on like user experience front on all sides almost, and the ZK's technology speed is improving so fast that in a few years I think that UX problem will also be solved. Okay, so about like the what people what was the question again? Sorry.
What's the misconception about like what sovereign rollups are, or the trade-offs that application developers are making by choosing to do this?
Yeah, the biggest misconception from our perspective is that we don't see much of a difference between sovereign rollup and like smart contract rollup. Do you have a bridge to the L1 or not? That's the main thing. And what we build in Sovereign Labs, Sovereign SDK enables like rollups of both type. It's just that like we don't need the smart contract to function. We out of the box like will rollup work as like sovereign rollup, and then if you deploy the bridge, it becomes a smart contract rollup. So for us, like there doesn't need to be as much as focus on a rollup being sovereign or not. It's a rollup at the end of the day, and that's the biggest misconception that we're dealing with.
I think the biggest misconception that I see is that sovereign rollups cannot interoperate with anything else, and that's not true. But yeah, I think that's a very common one.
Yeah, for sure.
Biggest misconception about rollups? I think that that they don't have a good definition. I think that it's like an ambiguous, hand-wavy thing is a misconception. I think whether or not something is a roll-up is a very clear yes or no.
Would you not say that a rollup that posts data to another blockchain to inherit its security, both safety and liveness, is considered just like by definition a rollup?
Any chain that posts data to another chain?
Not state, data to another chain so that it can inherit the full like safety and liveness of another chain.
Yeah, that's a rollup.
Yeah, so I think we have a definition now.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, Jim, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it and fix one thing that would increase the adoption of sovereign rollups or the performance of sovereign rollups, what would that be?
Just ship faster. Ship at insane speeds.
More engineers.
More cracked engineers.
I think I'd reduce the censorship possibilities. I think a lot of the challenges that we have technically come from this idea that like we have to reduce the amount of actors that can censor you and for how long they can censor you. I think if you start to reduce that, then you can improve a lot of the UX and a lot of the performance around blockchains.
The one thing that would do the most to accelerate sovereign rollup adoption is just for one really, really cool one to ship. And then once people see how cool they can be, a lot more people will be attracted to use this kind of architecture.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so breakout applications. We need more engineers, more developers working on applications for sovereign rollup. Cool. Okay, we're kind of bumping up on time. Do you guys have any closing remarks? No?
Thank you for having us, and see you around. If you have any questions about Cartesian and so on, just meet me. I'll be around.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for the thoughtful questions.
Yep. Thank you guys.